Commander Elo stomped up a cramped stairwell that stank of piss, her bulky body armor scraping against its old, chalky walls as the rain outside drilled against the slitted windows set into each landing. A draft sent a shiver down her feelers. Cruddy tower estates like these weren't fit for living in, yet every single poxy apartment was occupied by a family fighting to get by, and just generally fighting, if the myriad raised voices were any indication. Doors slammed shut on every floor she passed. This was hardly unusual. Officers of the Ministerium were almost universally disliked by the general public, but by this particular species especially. Homo sapiens, still at the bottom of the food chain, no matter how desperately some of their kind tried assimilating themselves into Kapamentis' popular culture. She shared a curt nod with an officer stationed at the top of the stairwell, then followed the corridor around towards apartment 1412. Precarious stacks of plastic crates, a torn couch with its stuffing poking out, flanked by empty beer bottles, crude graffiti, a skull painted in bright neon pinks and yellows. The north-facing wall was exposed to the elements and overlooked a quadrangle far below. The humans had installed basketball hoops on the walls and etched outlines of courts and pitches on the floor amongst the tumble-down market stalls. A second ministry executor guarded the door to the apartment. The faceless officer floated aside upon her approach without comment. The door itself used old-fashioned hinges rather than the modern and more common maglock system, or at least it had done before the officers tasked with investigating the tip-off booted it inwards. Elo squeezed herself through the door frame. The apartment was no less cramped than the stairwells and corridors, smelled worse too. The stale, recycled air was tainted by a stuffy, distinctly human perfume, sweet, tangy, not dissimilar to that of farm-bred livestock. She questioned how their kind could stand it. The initial room was predominantly occupied by a pair of wrinkly leather armchairs facing a 100-plus-inch flat-screen display, presuming one didn't count the assortment of dented beer cans and cigarette stubs littering the dusty concrete floor. Behind this was a small tiled kitchen area full of cheap electrical appliances Elo struggled to understand. Artifacts from humanity's old home world were far from her specialty. She supposed it was all the locals could afford. There was a bedroom at the opposite end of the apartment, its door cracked ajar. But this was of as little interest to the commander as the kettle and coffee machine. The corpse had been discovered in the bathroom, down the short hall and on the right. She entered, letting the thud of her boots broadcast her arrival. Two identical officers stood 3 feet from the body, covering their slitted nostrils with their webbed hands. The stench of pus and decay was overwhelming, especially so for reptilians, and made their black eyes glisten. "Commander," they said in unison, before hurriedly vacating the bathroom. Elo rearranged the tendrils that constituted her face to block out the odor as best she could. She approached the bathtub. The fluorescent light in the ceiling periodically flickered on and off, but a second, smaller set above the cracked mirror remained steadfast. The porcelain sink below the mirror was equally cracked, and a bucket had been placed under its pipes to catch the drips. The seat of the toilet opposite had come off its hinges, presumably in a bid to escape the crusty brown abyss that was the uncleaned bowl. The bathtub occupied the far wall. Those parts which weren't caked in a film of filth were tarnished with rust. A shower rail had been fitted across the width of the bathroom. Its cheap, blue, plastic curtain had been pulled all the way to the left. The two officers from before had been tasked with investigating a possible suicide. A neighbor had made the call from a payphone on the ground floor of the tower block, meaning their name and comm ID were unknown. Honestly, what surprised Elo more was that a human living in the notorious Ale Station estate had thought to call the ministry at all. The body was still where they'd discovered it, though one of the officers had tried to lift it out of the tub before realizing the corpse was long past the point of rescue.